I love to hear people read from my books aloud. And I was thrilled to hear that Eliza would be willing to read a passage which has not ended up in the movie. It is from the end of the book, so if you don't want to know what happens, close your ears now.
Hello, I'm Eliza Bennett and I play Meggie in Inkheart. I would love to share with you one of my favourite passages that didn't get put into the film. Eleanor did a great deal of buying over the next few weeks. She brought books. She travelled all over Europe in search of them. Darius was always with her, and sometimes Mo went with them too. But Meggie stayed in the big house with her mother. They would sit together at the window, looking out of the garden where the fairies were building themselves nests, gently glowing globes that hung among the branches of the trees. The glass men and women settled into Eleanor's attic, and the trolls dug caves among the big old trees which grew in abundance in Eleanor's garden. She told them all that, if possible, they should never leave her property, warning them urgently of the dangers of the world beyond the hedges that enclosed it. But soon the fairies were flying down to the lake by night. The trolls were walking along its bank and stealing into the sleeping villages, and the little glass people would disappear into the tall grass that's covered the slopes of the mountains. "Don't worry too much," said Mo whenever Eleanor bewailed their stupidity. After all, the world they came from wasn't without its dangers. "But it was different," cried Eleanor. "There were no cars. Suppose the fairies fly into a windscreen? And there was no hunters with rifles shooting at anything that moves, just for the fun of it." By now, Eleanor knew everything about the world of Inkheart. Maggie's mother had needed a great deal of paper to write down her memories of it. Every evening, Meggie asked her to tell more stories, and then they sat together while Teresa wrote and Meggie read the words, and sometimes even tried to paint pictures of what her mother described. The days went by and Eleanor's shelves filled up with wonderful new books. Some of them were in poor condition, and Darius, who had begun to draw up a catalogue of Eleanor's printed treasures, kept interrupting his own work to watch Mo at his. He sat there wide-eyed as Mo freed a badly worn book from its old cover, fixed loose pages back, glued the spines in place, and did whatever else was necessary to preserve the books for many more years to come. Long after all this, Meggie couldn't have said exactly when they decided to stay on with Eleanor. Perhaps not for many weeks, or perhaps they'd known from the first day they were back. Meggie was given the room with the bed that was much too big for her, and which still had her book box standing underneath it. She would have loved to read aloud to her mother from her own favourite books. But of course, she understood why Mo very seldom did so. And one night, while she couldn't get to sleep, because she thought she saw Basta's face out in the dark, she sat down at the desk in front of her window and began to write, while the fairies played in Eleanor's garden and the trolls rustled in the bushes. For Meggie had a plan. She wanted to learn to make up stories like Fenolio. She wanted to learn to fish for words so that she could read aloud to her mother, without worrying about who might come out of the stories and look at her with homesick eyes. So Meggie decided that words would be her trade. And where better could she learn than trade in a house full of magical creatures where fairies built their nests in the garden and books whispered on the shelves by night? As Mo had said, writing stories is a kind of magic too.